Hey, everybody, and welcome back to For the Booze.
For the Booze. I think I cut out there.
For the Booze.
So we're back for another week.
We are.
We're another normal week. I mean, we were here last week, but it was we took a week off, kind of.
Kinda.
I mean,
yeah.
we were on another show.
Yes.
And then
we
did try our new For the News, which is actually going over pretty well. And somebody actually commented on YouTube that they really enjoyed it.
I thoroughly enjoyed that. I think it's kind of dipping into a different side of the paranormal, like the paranormal community part of it.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I really enjoyed that.
I think it's going to be something that we're going to do periodically on the show. We're not going to always take weeks off. We'll just add them in. We'll just pepper them in here and there. Just
sprinkle them on in.
One thing, though, I had forgot to mention that I wanted to mention was all the controversial stuff that was going on with the Paranormal Files on YouTube.
Yes.
And I want to bring this up because I actually made a comment on the Twitter that people didn't appreciate. And the comment, I'm not trying to put the Paranormal Files down. If you go back and listen to our episode, you will know that we thoroughly enjoy the channel.
Yes.
So people are reading too much into it, honestly. And I got into a little argument with some girl, but it is what it is. It's the internet. But I don't think it's right in any way that whoever is out there reporting them for stuff that they clearly aren't doing. They don't do that kind of stuff.
Right.
It's a very professional channel. It's not right, and I don't agree with it. And I definitely stand with letting them have their show back and keep it back. And maybe YouTube could do something about maybe looking further into
the reports and stuff.
Well, yeah, not letting that kind of stuff happen. I mean, there's got to be something they can do.
Right.
Because clearly that channel's never done anything like that. So,
no.
For what it's worth, anybody out there who may have saw me arguing, I do stand with them having their channel, and they are a respectable, they're a good channel, and they should have it. So
they should. We enjoy watching them.
Absolutely.
A lot. Colin and Courtney.
Yep.
And
so like their podcast too.
Yeah. Oh yeah.
It's a great podcast.
Murder in America. Super good podcast.
Yeah,
very good.
I like it.
But I think they've worked very hard for what they have. I enjoy watching them, and I don't think that a random keyboard warrior should have the power to have that happen.
Can you really even call them a keyboard warrior? They didn't even have the sack enough to actually
say something.
They just reported them for whatever reason. It's less than a keyboard warrior.
Agreed.
So while I'm not running back anything that I might have said online, I stand by with what I said.
Yeah.
But I also stand with the fact that they didn't deserve any of that stuff. So
no.
Good for them. I'm happy they got it back. And they did. As far as I know, they still have it back, and it hasn't been a problem since. So if it does come up again, we'll put it on the next For the News. I didn't mean to put it on there.
The news.
But on to the show. We are going to be doing things a little different this week. We unfortunately have a very sick kid.
Oh, poor little guy.
We're gonna take it back to like the OG podcast days, and we're just gonna have a conversation. And I thought, what a great one to do that on, and you'll see why. Bears a little bit of resemblance to some of the stuff, say like in Raynham Hall.
Ooh.
But I think this one would make a good story time and I know you've never heard of this place because I had never heard of this place.
I still have never heard of this place.
This place is different.
I am learning with you,
This
Booze
is
Crew.
different. This one's different. I'm just gonna throw it out there right now, and you'll see why. However, I'm not gonna have anything to play at the end of the show, but I am gonna play something.
Okay.
I won't have any EVPs and stuff like that, but I will have something.
Okay. Ominous.
Don't get your hopes up. It's from YouTube. But on with the show. Let's go ahead and start this.
All right, let's do it.
Okay. In the 16th century, Lenape referred to its farthest northwest corner by the cove on the Hudson River as present-day Gainsvort Street as Sapokanakan, or the tobacco field. Now, the land was cleared and turned into pasture by Dutch and their slaves, who named their settlement Nortwick.
Something like that.
Something like that. Some Dutch name. Now, in the 1630s, Governor Wouter van Twiller farmed tobacco on 200 acres here at his, quote, farm in the woods. The English conquered the Dutch settlement of New Netherland in 1664, and Greenwich Village developed as a hamlet separate from the larger New York City to the south on land that would eventually become the financial district. In 1644, 11 Dutch African settlers in the area were freed after the first black legal protest in America. All received parcels of land in what is now Greenwich Village. The earliest known reference to the village's name as Greenwich dates back to 1696 in the Will of Yellis Mandeville of Greenwich. However, the village was not mentioned in the city records until 1713. Sir Peter Warren began accumulating land in 1731 and built a frame house capacious enough. Capacious. What a word. Capacious enough to hold sittings of the New York General Assembly when smallpox rendered the city dangerous in 1739 and subsequent years.
Ugh, smallpox.
On one occasion, in 1746, the house of Mordecai Gomez was used. Mordecai. Warren's house, which survived until the Civil War era, overlooked the North River from a bluff. Its site on the block bounded by Perry and Charles Streets. Bleecker and West 4th Streets can still be recognized by its mid-19th century row houses inserted into a neighborhood still retaining many houses of the 1830 to 1837 boom. In 1797 until 1829, the Bucolic Village of Greenwich was the location of New York State's first penitentiary, Newgate Prison, on the Hudson River at what is now West 10th Street, near the Christopher Street Pier. The building was designed by Joseph Francois Mangan, who would later co-design New York City Hall. Interesting. Although the intention of its first warden, Quaker prison reformer Thomas Eddy, was to provide a rational and humanitarian place for retribution and rehabilitation, the prison soon became an overcrowded and pestilent place, subject to frequent riots by the prisoners, which damaged the buildings and killed some inmates, as prisons do.
Yeah, riots tend to do that.
I think every prison we've ever talked about is rife with riots.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's like I get it on the prisoner's side of things, like an uproar and they treat us like crap and like let's all rile together. But
especially during this time.
Yeah. But it's prison.
Not to mention, it's 1800s prison in New York.
Yeah. It's just, I don't know, it's crazy.
It can't be good.
No.
Now, by 1821, the prison designed for 432 inmates held 817 instead.
Wow.
A number made possible only by the frequent release of prisoners, sometimes as many as 50 a day. Since the prison was north of New York City boundary at the time, being sentenced to Newgate became known as being, quote, sent up the river. The term became popularized once prisoners started being sentenced to Sing Sing prison in the town of Ossining. I'll let you New Yorkers work it out. Upstream of New York City. I'm not from New York, so I'm probably going to butcher some of this stuff.
Yeah, well.
It is what it is. The oldest house remaining in Greenwich Village is the Isaac Hendricks House at 77 Bedford Street. Built in 1799, renovated later in 1836, and had a third story added in 1928. When the Church of St. Luke in the Fields was founded in 1820, it stood in fields south of the road that led from Greenwich Lane down to a landing on the North River. In 1822, a yellow fever epidemic in New York encouraged residents to flee to the healthier air of Greenwich Village, and afterwards many people stayed. The future site of Washington Square was a potter's field from 1797 to 1823, when up to 20,000 of New York's poor were buried there and still remain to this day. Which means there is an entire little town built on top of poor people remains.
Yeah, that's
pretty sad.
Sad.
I think
sure.
it's a good recipe for making the spookies. The handsome Greek Revival row houses on the north side of Washington Square were built about 1832, establishing the fashion of Washington Square and Lower Fifth Ave for decades to come. Well into the 19th century, the district of Washington Square was considered separate from Greenwich Village. Located down one of the most picturesque blocks in New York City stands a building with a notoriously dark past.
Ooh.
Nicknamed, quote,
The House of Death.
Oh.
14 West 10th Street is supposedly haunted by 22 ghosts, the most famous of which is Mark Twain, who resided there from 1900 to 1901.
Wow. I feel like he pops up in a lot of our episodes, but some of them are like, he didn't even live there.
I feel...
But he lived here.
Well, he's known to haunt other places that he lived, which he's busy in his afterlife.
Yeah, right?
But this one has a much better Mark Twain story than most.
Oh.
A Greek Revival home, number 14, was built during the late 1850s in the favorable era of Washington Square Park. Before landing its famous name, the brownstone was home to many members of New York's elite, including Mrs. James Borman Johnston, whose husband had been a founding member of the Metropolitan Underground Railroad and the Broadway Underground Railroad. Greenwich Village historically was known as an important landmark on the map of American Bohemian culture in the early and mid-20th century. The neighborhood was known for its colorful, artistic residents and the alternative culture that they propagated. Due in part to the progressive attitudes of many of its residents, the village was a focal point of new movements and ideas, whether political, artistic, or cultural. The tradition was an enclave of avant-garde and alternative culture was established during the 19th century and continued into the 20th century, when small presses, art galleries, and experimental theater would thrive. The house seems to have started earning its reputation gradually after the Johnston family stopped living there. The first recorded incident happened in 1897. Cycling celebrity Fred H. Andrew, and then owner and occupier of 14 West 10th Street, had a moment of bad luck. During his residency, as described in New York Times of August 9th, 1897, Andrew had a moment of, quote, reckless bicycle riding that caused him to hit a boy around 8 years old. The boy suffered a broken leg, and Andrew was subsequently arrested. It's a different time. It's a different time.
Reckless bicycling.
That's what they called it.
Oh, okay.
Now, in 1900, the building became the favorite residence of author Samuel Clemens, more notably known as Mark Twain, despite only living there for a little over a year. The famous author was battling bankruptcy and churning out some of his rushed but classic works at the time. Twain was a noted ghost skeptic, yet wrote a very clear and plain paranormal experience he had in his new home. One evening, he witnessed a large piece of wood kindling move in the air by itself. Thinking the wood was being moved by a rat, he shot it with his gun. It suddenly fell to the ground, surrounded by a few drops of blood. Twain maintained that the blood was that of a rodent and not that of a ghost. In the 1930s, a mother and daughter claimed to have encountered the author, sitting near a window where he stated, quote,
My name is Clemens, and I has a problem here I gotta settle.
He would allegedly disappear moments later. So while we've heard a lot of Mark Twain stuff, I don't think anybody's ever claimed that he has sat in a chair and spoken to them.
And said his name.
Wow.
That's crazy.
That is crazy.
Wow.
As the demand for housing grew in New York City, many brownstones were converted to multifamily apartments. 14 West 10th Street was no exception and was transformed from a single-family home into 10 apartments in 1937. According to the New York Post, actress Jane Bryant Bartell and her husband moved into the top-floor apartment, the former servants' quarters, and almost immediately began feeling a presence she described as a, quote, monstrous moving shadow. She documented her struggle with the paranormal in her book, Spindrift, Spray from a Psychic Sea, which she completed in 1974. Making this street even more macabre, Bartell also experienced hauntings in 16 West 10th Street, where she lived in the 1950s before moving into Mark Twain's house. Whether these paranormal visions were left over from 16 West 10th Street or her visions in the next door house were reverberations from 14 West 10th Street is forever left unknown. All right, I'm gonna make a little statement.
Okay.
Sometimes we have parts in the show where people might not be comfortable with listening to things, especially involving children. This is going to be one of those times.
Ugh. Okay.
This one's pretty bad.
Man.
It's pretty bad. I wasn't expecting this when I read this either, and I'm surprised I'd never heard of this. You'll see.
All right. Let's get through it.
Criminal defense attorney Joel Steinberg, 46 years old, lived in the Greenwich Villiage, New York City apartment with his common-law wife, his partner of over a decade, Hedda Nussbaum, who was 45 years old. Hedda Nussbaum was a children's book editor at one time, but left her career behind because of what was happening behind closed doors. The building that they lived in, 14 West 10th Street, was the same building that Mark Twain had once lived in. They had allegedly adopted 2 children, a 6-year-old girl named Lisa and a 16-month-old boy named Mitchell. This highly educated, seemingly upper-class couple with the adorable children was hiding a nightmarish secret that the world would soon find out about. On November 2nd, 1987, Miss Nussbaum called 911 and reported that her daughter Lisa had choked on her food and vomited. She also told the 911 dispatcher that Lisa had been falling a lot lately on her roller skates. The falling down story was told because, at the time, Lisa had several bruises all over her body. When first responders got to the apartment, Lisa was unconscious. The police found 16-month-old Mitchell, who was chained to his crib and laying in urine and feces, but otherwise unharmed. The apartment was disgusting and dirty. The family was living in squalor. There was $25,000 in cash found in the apartment, along with a lot of cocaine and other drugs. There were also bloodstains found all throughout the apartment, and the kitchen sink was somehow ripped off the wall.
Jesus.
Nussbaum showed signs that she had also been beaten. Joel Steinberg and Hedda Nussbaum were both arrested on charges of child abuse on November 2nd, and Lisa died in the hospital on November 4th. While Hedda started out as a co-defendant, it was later decided that the years of abuse that she suffered made her incompetent to help when Lisa was being abused. She became a witness, and her version of what happened to Lisa is devastating and sickening. According to Nussbaum, on November 1st, Joel was going out for dinner and partying with friends, and Lisa wanted to go with him. He didn't want to bring her with him, and he ended up hitting her in the head with a rubber-headed hammer. Nussbaum said that Lisa was already unconscious when Steinberg left the apartment, but instead of calling 911 then, she sat in the filthy apartment for several hours with baby Mitchell and Lisa, who was fatally injured and dying. She claimed that she was waiting for Steinberg to come home because she believed that he would be able to wake Lisa up. When he finally got home, the couple still did not call 911. Instead, they decided to freebase cocaine so that they could, quote, relate better.
Oh, my God.
And on November 2nd, Nussbaum would finally call 911 with the choking and falling down story. Lisa was only 6 years old. Her teachers would later say that she came to school with bruises and missing chunks of her hair. When asked about it, Lisa would say her little brother Mitchell had hit her. Through all of the abuse, Lisa was a smart, friendly, and very beautiful little girl. None of the teachers ever filed a report about Lisa being abused, even though they believed that she was. Nussbaum was sent to a psychiatric hospital, and Steinberg was charged with second-degree murder and first-degree manslaughter. It became known that during the course of their relationship, Nussbaum had suffered years of abuse, 9 broken ribs, her jaw had been broken, and her nose had been broken. In exchange for her testimony against Steinberg, Nussbaum would not be prosecuted at all for Lisa's death. Whether you're a resident one day at 14 West 10th Street or even someone who plans on visiting the city of New York, it might just be scary knowing that this place is home to a claimed 22 spirits. Even if you are passing through the home, you never know what or who you may encounter while you're in and around the area. While there is a good chance that people are still living there, don't be shocked if they happen to have a story or two of some small paranormal activity that may have happened. The question for you is, if the opportunity were to arise, would you live in a place known as the House of Death?
Probably not.
It's such a sad story. I saw the picture of the little girl. She's so cute. And what she endured there is horrible. It's
Absolutely tragic.
It is terrible. And I wish I would have remembered this. I wrote this 2 weeks ago. I think he's out.
Oh.
I think he is. I know she is, and I believe possibly living in the area. I can't remember. But, like, I don't know. I find it very disturbing, honestly, the whole thing.
Absolutely.
It's just horrible. It is just horrible. So,
and I do want to say, and, you know, it was the late 80s, and listen, like we always say different times and stuff. You know what I mean? But I mean, it was the late 80s. It doesn't feel like it was all that long ago, although
it wasn't. Come on now. You're going to make me feel old.
Oh, I feel old.
But you're a young, spry woman.
Oh, okay. I was like a year old, so not really. But okay. The teachers see something, say something. You know, and they could have possibly been able to prevent that. So if anybody out there ever has a family member or a friend or anyone you know, and you see those signs,
say something,
of bruises, changes in personality, isolation, all those things, say something.
I mean, this all could have been prevented if somebody would have reported the girlfriend being beaten.
Yeah, absolutely.
But, you know,
awful.
I remember living through the 80s because I'm old. And I remember the attitude of the 80s, and it was like, mind your business. You know, like everybody minded their business back in the day.
Yeah.
You know, to a
fault.
The extreme of it, you know, like, oh, little Timmy looks like he's getting beat pretty bad at home. Mind your business. You know, and that was the attitude of the time.
Yeah. And I get that. It's not now. So see something.
Well,
something.
There was such a fine line back then too, because like people beat their kids back then. You know, like I remember seeing my friends getting whooped out in their front yard like they were grown men. So
did you?
No. Nope. I got some spankings though. I did for running my mouth.
I got like one spanking in my life.
Oh no, I probably got a few hundred, but I mean, a lot of the times I probably deserved some of them.
I just couldn't imagine.
It was a different time. It was.
I get that, but
I remember neighbors being able to spank you. Like,
oh yeah, for sure.
Or going and getting paddled at the school. It was a different time. You know?
But like even now, like with people we know and we're close with, like if our kids are around you and you see them doing something, like I'm not saying like spank my kid or anything, but
no, but say
you
something.
can punish them for sure.
For sure. But that's the story of the House of Death. Now I'm going to be honest with you. I really thought that there would be 22 spirits worth of stories.
Right.
But maybe there are a few more. And I'm going to tell you all about these stories.
You?
Well, yeah. Well, because we're doing things a little different this week.
I know. I'm just kidding.
You can come back on the next one.
I'm here for story time.
So, but before we do that, you know, we do have to take an ad break. So we'll be back after these ads.
And now, Booze Crew, back to Stephen's story time.
Okay, so now comes the haunted part.
Oh, spooky ooky time.
The spooky ooky time. Now, in the bustling and picturesque neighborhood of Greenwich Village, the many streets are lined with 100-year-old plus brownstones that give that classic New York City vibe. A lot of the old world Manhattan charm still exists on these city blocks and homes. But for one totally unassuming building on West 10th Street, It is locally known as the House of Death, and it has quite an active paranormal presence.
Bring it.
Now, in the early days of the house, everything seemed normal for families that lived there. Several founding members of New York City's Underground Railroad were among the first residents. These residents were James Borman Johnson and his wife. Though they left after only a few years, they had nothing but good things to say about the home, commenting on how modern it was and how nice it was to be near the park. They reported no supernatural instances. Slowly, reports of ghosts started to pop up as residents kept coming and going from the home. There was even a rumor that a demon dwelled inside the home. Now, this kept many people from even entertaining the idea of living there until 1900. So this was in 1900.
Yeah.
People thought a demon lived there.
Long time
Crazy.
to be dubbed a haunted place.
Very long. Now, just weeks after Jane Bryant Bartell moved to the huge old mansion at 14 West 10th Street off of Fifth Ave in 1957, she felt, quote, a monstrous moving shadow that loomed up behind her. She turned and saw nothing there, but she couldn't shake the feeling that she was not alone, and maybe never would be, in the already aging house with fretted balustrades and Civil War-era glass in the windows. It had a feeling all its own. The incident took several minutes and several cigarettes, cups of tea, and nips of brandy to shake it off. But it wouldn't be the last in the 7-year stretch of psychological and sometimes physical torment Bartell suffered from what she claimed were the icy hands of the house's former inhabitants, reaching out from the afterlife to grab her.
Oh, God.
Bartell's story of torment is just one of the documented legends swirling around neighboring numbers 16 and 14 on 10th Street in Greenwich Villiage, the block and otherwise picturesque New York byway that's home to writers and actors is dripping with tales of death and hauntings. Number 14 has earned the nickname the House of Death. Residents have reported seeing the ghost of Mark Twain walking about in a white suit and hair, along with a spectral cat waving its tail and a woman in a long flowing gown passing through doorways. But some say there's a curse that touches people who live there. Bartell died under mysterious circumstances just a few weeks after finishing her manuscript about her experiences in the house. Most notoriously, number 14 was the site of a grisly murder in 1987 when former criminal defense attorney Joe Steinberg beat a 6-year-old girl to death.
Ugh.
Number 14, considered the classic brownstone, was built sometime in the 1850s, right before the Civil War, when the area around Washington Square was booming. It was originally one house, but it's now split into 10 different apartments, at least 9 of which had names on the buzzers and mailboxes. Legend has it, the house witnessed 22 deaths. Not terribly unusual for a century-and-a-half-old home, except some of those spirits have never left. The most famous was Twain, who lived there for a year. A plaque outside the door brags of his tenure there. Though he died in Connecticut, one resident reported seeing a specter resembling the author saying, "My name is Clemens, and I has a problem I gotta settle," before disappearing. Not all ghosts have been like kindly old Sam Clemens. Residents have reported seeing sightings as recently as a few years ago, and some of them have been chilling enough to scare people away from the building forever. Dennis, a musician and photo buff, has lived on the 3rd floor in number 16 for more than 20 years. He says he has seen, quote, little clips and visions of a woman in a long gown going from one room to another, as well as experiencing seemingly random flickering of lights. Is it possible that he could be seeing the same ghost from next door, the House of Death? And walls don't stop them from doing anything, he says. He recalled one night many years ago when he was photographing a dancer in his living room. He left her alone in the room for just a minute, or so he thought. His guest was startled to see a lady in a long flowing gown, followed by a cat, walking into the room. The dancer picked up her stuff and she ran out. She wasn't the first female visitor who fled his apartment after being spooked. Quote, I have girls that would never come back, Dennis says. The most detailed account of life in the possessed buildings comes from Bartell's memoir, Spindrift, Spray from a Psychic Sea, written in 1974, just before she died. From the first day, Bartell and her husband, Fred, moved into the top floor that was once the servants' quarters. She felt the strange chill of the house closing in around her, but due to a housing shortage at the time, she had little choice but then to stick it out. The strange occurrences started out small. A sound of footsteps following her up the stairs. A brush against the back of her neck, even when her hair was tied up. A strange rotting smell that would seemingly come and go like wispy smoke. Things got darker. Shadows that no light would touch. A mysterious chair their dog would snarl and growl at, as if it contained some invisible enemy. Then a phantom, shriveled grape that appeared in the dead center of a clean dinner plate, even though the couple hadn't bought grapes in months. She found furniture inexplicably moved from its usual place. The sound of crashing glass chased her around the building. Most unsettling was the odors that appeared out of nowhere. One fragrant like ancient perfume, the other a rotting miasma that was offensive. Then one day, a vision of a man appeared. It was so realistic, yet she knew it was not. Bartell reached out to touch it. Quote, what was it that I touched? A substance without substance. Chilly, damp, diaphanous, as marsh mist or a cloud of ether. I could feel my fingers freeze at the tips. They were numb, and yet they tingled. In the split second between contact and recoil, the scent came, fragile and languorous, and sweet, unbearably, cloyingly sweet, she said. Finally, Bartell and her husband decided to fight back. They called in a paranormal expert and a medium to see if they could help. Immediately, the medium felt a presence. There was something dead under the floorboards, 3 things maybe. A young girl with curly hair, blue eyes, and a tiny nose, and an aborted child, and of course, a small gray cat. Suddenly, the medium snapped into a trance and was possessed with the spirit of Renee Mallison, a 19-year-old who said she was born in 1848. She blamed President Lincoln for killing her husband, Henry McDermott. By making him fight in the Civil War, she wailed over her aborted child. The paranormal expert had heard enough. He told the spirits to vacate the premises immediately because the Bartells were the rightful occupants. Quote, go and leave these people in peace, he said. The medium's voice shot back like an explosion. Never! I will never leave here, Bartell recalled her saying.
Wow.
Quote, they will have to go. This is my home. I will never leave. And after that, the Bartells didn't feel safe. They moved away shortly after, though Bartell herself could never shake the feeling that the house had poisoned her.
Wow.
Now, by far, the most reported phenomena in the so-called House of Death is a woman in white. The spirit's description varies slightly between accounts. Some people say she wears a nightgown, and some say it's an actual dress. Bartell's visiting medium even mentioned sensing a woman in white. The spirit wanders through walls and walking through doors. Lights often flicker with no concrete source of the disturbance, which some attribute to the woman in white. There are seemingly no specific identities tied to the woman in white, though this is not surprising to anyone, as many of the alleged spirits are still unidentified. According to most paranormal experts, shadow people and the smell of rotting flesh can indicate a demonic presence. This presence could be the reason many of the spirits have stuck around. Sadly, it could also encourage the unfortunate tragedies to occur at the home. Since the Bartells moved out, there have been several horrific incidents inside the building, including a murder-suicide as well as the abuse and eventual murder of a child in 1987. The murder of Lisa Steinberg was the reason the building became known as the House of Death. The spirits that dwell in these walls have witnessed all these events occur, and some may have even fed off of them. People walking by this seemingly classic brownstone built in the 1850s, not knowing that it is allegedly haunted by the existence of 22 ghosts. Those brave enough to reside in the home have reported seeing everything from the ghost of Mark Twain walking around in a white suit, a woman in a long flowing gown passing through doors, and even a spooky little cat waving its tail. Meow. Meow. Well, who knows? They may have gotten the house of death for a bargain. But surely many regret their decision to live there due to the curse that touches all of its inhabitants. Most people living in New York City are unaware of the history behind the house. A short YouTube video interviews passers-by who are mostly unaware of what happened inside of its walls. Much like Raynham Hall, this is currently a residence. There are no YouTube investigations or television shows, EVPs, or really anything to go by. We do have an account from the 1950s. And while some of the evidence may be a bit unbelievable, you have to ask yourself, what do you think? Is Mark Twain still living in the house that he once loved? Who is the woman in white, and why is she still there? Is the spirit of poor little Lisa Steinberg trapped in the house where she was tragically beaten to death? And finally, would you be willing to live in the infamous House of Death?
No. No, I would not.
That was quick.
I would not want to live there. You always hear about like the woman in white, and
It's a very common thing.
it is a very, very common thing that we find in a lot of different places too. Like we've heard about it in prisons where women you generally haven't been.
Hey, women in white should not be in prison. They're a bad place for you guys.
But I don't know. Those are some really good accounts. I feel like the lady who wrote the book may have been a bit of a psychic herself, or at least like a sensitive or something.
Possibly. That's what it was alluding to.
Yeah, which is why she kind of felt the things that she felt so strongly.
But the curse of the house is that she died. And she died. Like, she had been moved out for years.
And then wrote the book.
And then died after.
Yeah,
But
that's crazy.
By my count, we only talked about like 5 spirits.
Yeah.
So what are the other ones?
Where are the other 20?
Well,
no, not 20, because there's only 22. I can't do math.
But see, that's why I read the whole thing about the Potter's Field and the war going on at the time and the slaves and everything else, because we've talked about it before. Like, these lands where people are having paranormal experiences were other people's lands long before that.
Yes.
So, while, sure, maybe there is the body of a woman, a baby, and a cat under there, I'm sure below that there are many, many more bodies.
Yes, very much so.
And it's a place that, like, you could go rent right now. Well, as long as nobody's living there. But it's people live there, like a regular apartment.
It always amazes me. Like, I'm from Florida, right? And I went with you to your hometown in Massachusetts, and we're driving around, and there's all these like 2- and 3-story houses everywhere. And I'm like, wow, these houses are amazing. And you're like, yeah, they're apartments. I'm like, what?
Yeah.
Like, that's not a thing down here.
No.
So it just amazed me how you'd like chop up a house like that.
Well, and you got to go in some of them, so.
Yeah, and it was, I don't know, it's very interesting.
It is, and they do. They were all once houses.
Yeah.
And then they turn them into multifamily homes, so they could rent them out, and a lot of them don't get a lot of attention, unfortunately, and are falling apart.
Yeah.
But, yeah, it's just something they do, and, up north in city areas where there's a bigger population, and it's how you fit everybody in.
It's so crazy to me. It's so crazy.
And honestly, it sucks living in them. I'm not going to lie. I've lived in many multifamily apartments, and yet somebody's always complaining about the neighbors. So
yeah, I bet there isn't the thickest walls in there.
No. Well, I mean, you're essentially living in a house together with a bunch of people.
Yeah.
So I did say that I was going to play something, and what I'm going to play is actually the YouTube video of the interviewer that was actually talking to people on the street. It's not very long. I think it might be 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes long.
Okay.
But I found it very interesting because for a place called the House of Death, you would really expect a lot of people to really
know more about it.
know a lot about it.
Yeah.
This is by the YouTube channel called Curbed, and this came out in 2013. So this is well after the death of the little girl and stuff.
Yeah.
But it's just going to show you that it's just kind of weird that nobody knows about this place. So let me cue this thing up. And there's actually another video too. Maybe we'll play both of them and see what they have to say. I would love to come across somebody who actually knows something about it. I think that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, more from like maybe not somebody who specifically lived in the place, but somebody who's done the research and maybe like been in there and I don't know, maybe not spent like living amounts of time in there to see if like they would experience something.
Yeah.
I don't know.
It'd be cool to open this up to paranormal investigators one day, but
yes,
we'll see what happens. But here we go. This is Curbed, and it's just an interview of people on the street. So here we go.
I think it's attractive, but it's obviously in a state of disrepair.
It looks very beautiful. It is old, obviously. It's
super cute, and it says Mark Twain on it.
Well, obviously the shades are in disarray. These windows down here are completely blocked out.
Would you believe me if I told you that it was known to be haunted and actually referred to as the House of Death?
That seems a little alarming.
The home is believed to be haunted by 22 spirits, including Mark Twain, actually.
You're kidding.
House of Death.
Would you be interested in living there, knowing that it was...
I live at the other end of the street, and I'm kind of happy there.
I wouldn't be interested in living in a haunted building, but I wouldn't be afraid of living in a haunted building.
I would probably have one of my New Age guru mamas come in with the feng shui and the little sage, exactly, and the smudging of the corners of the rooms.
That makes it awesome. Me and Mark Twain's ghost can hang out and,
I love Mark Twain, so I'd like to go in and have a chat.
Yeah.
The real estate trumps the haunting.
I love that in New York that this building that I walk past every day, I had no idea that it was the House of Death. It's cool.
Houses don't scare me.
So that is the interview that they did.
Interesting.
And nobody seems to know about it,
Right.
which is so weird to me.
They're just like, oh yeah, it's a house that I walk by all the time,
Every day, they said.
or live down the street, or, interesting.
Now we're going to watch another clip from YouTube by a channel called The Curious World. And there's honestly there's a little bit of a description here. It just says, join me as I check out New York City's House of Death. So maybe we'll learn something on here that we didn't already know.
Okay.
So this one's a little longer, but it's only about 3.5 minutes. But let's give it a gander.
The first time I ever walked past this place was around 2 in the morning. My friend and I had heard about this place and we thought, why not? So we came here after a night out and we just stood outside and looked. The street was eerily silent and there were some weird lights going on upstairs, probably just a television, but I felt fear. Welcome to New York City's House of Death. This is 14 West 10th Street. And currently this building is comprised of, I believe, 10 apartments. The building itself was built sometime before the Civil War in around the 1850s. Now, most of the information I have about this place comes from a New York Post article from 2012, so I will link that in the description below. This place is famous for its ghost activity, most notably that of a very famous writer. Mark Twain lived here from 1900 to 1901. Now, it seems very strange that Mark Twain would haunt a place that he only lived in for approximately 1 year, but he was once spotted sitting next to a window and he allegedly stated, "My name is Clemens, and I have a problem here I gotta settle." Now, according to the New York Post article, this house has allegedly seen 22 deaths, so there are supposed 22 ghosts residing within. However, I can only find mention of a few specific ones, like a woman in a long flowing gown and a ghost cat. And actually, the legends even extend over to building number 16, where one resident reported many experiences of ghostly women in flowing gowns. Some say there's a curse. One resident died under mysterious circumstances after she finished writing a book on her experiences living in this house. Jan Bryant Bartell was an off-Broadway actress who reported things like a monstrous moving shadow, the sound of footsteps, awful smells like a rotting miasma, moved furniture, and loud unexplained sounds. When a medium was finally called in to investigate, he reportedly felt the presence of a young woman with curly hair, an aborted child, and the ghost of a gray cat. The medium also became possessed by the spirit of a young woman who was wailing over her aborted child. She was supposedly 19 years old, and she had been born in 1848. Now, while these are all unconfirmed reports, there is one very real tale of horror that happened here. In 1987, a lawyer named Joel B. Steinberg beat his illegally adopted daughter into a coma. The 6-year-old Lisa Steinberg was later declared brain dead, and she was removed from life support. Steinberg was put away for 17 years. Now, while in broad daylight in the hustle and bustle of Manhattan, helicopters overhead, taxis rolling by, construction's happening over there, it feels a little bit silly to believe in ghost stories. However, that doesn't detract from the fact that this building definitely has a storied past. Thank you guys so much for watching. Don't forget to hit subscribe, and see you next time.
Don't forget to hit subscribe. Subscribe. I feel very accomplished. I mean, I probably could have just played that, and that could have been the episode.
Yeah, right. I mean, you touched on everything that she did, and it sounds like the same article was.
Well, I mean, I took from more than just one article. I had to go through a few, but
like Wikipedia.
Yeah, there was a lot of articles I went through, especially to find about the resident dentist that lived there.
Yeah,
and the whole story of the possession, and just all the stuff. I had to read a lot of stuff for this one. A lot of repetitive stuff.
Yeah, I'm sure.
So that's the House of Death, and really the only one that we know for a fact really did happen was Lisa.
Right.
And, and that is very tragic.
Super, super sad.
So now that we've listened to them all, we do have to get to an important part of the show. And it goes, bricky, bricky.
Is it real?
Me asking you, Mama Megan, do you think that the House of Death is haunted?
I could definitely see this place being haunted. I think it's one of those not super well-known things, but like only the people who live there and spend time there have experiences. And I don't know, I'm not going to say that all stories that have been reported on and, all the sightings are exactly true, but I see the potential for this place to be haunted, especially its before now history. Like how many bodies buried?
2 human bodies and a cat.
Yeah. And like even before that and the war, and like we say this all the time, like the past and the people who lived in the past and died on the property, whether the house was there or not, like that stuff lingers.
Yeah.
And I could definitely see this place having some haunted potential.
Nice.
What about you?
I'm actually going to say no.
Okay.
I'm not saying no because I don't believe it could be haunted. I'm just saying no, there's just not enough evidence for me.
Yeah.
And people live there now, and if it was so haunted and so scary, then why isn't it more well known?
Right.
Not saying that like every haunted place has to be like overly documented, but there's not really much of anything to go off of, and I refuse to believe that the spirit of Mark Twain is haunting a place that he barely lived in for a year.
Or like hung out at for a year.
Yeah, I don't know. It seems very made up. Like some of that stuff. Some of the other stuff seems more legit, but I don't know about the whole, possession thing. I just don't know. So I can't say yes for this one until somebody lets people in there, and I just don't know. And I feel so torn because with a place called the House of Death, man, I wanted it to be like super rad and dark.
Gruesome.
But it is very dark, but
it is.
But for a real reason.
Right.
As opposed to, something a little more spooky
Mm-hmm.
It was more violent and horrible. So, we're just not going to be able to give it the seal of approval this week. Your yes wasn't all in, and
It wasn't.
I'm saying
no.
so
Like I said, I could see the potential.
it has potential.
However,
But until somebody digs up the floorboard and finds a woman, an aborted
Right.
baby, and a cat,
yeah.
I'm not in on that one because
And
I could go there and say Ronald McDonald's dead under the floorboards. Doesn't mean he is.
And I would like to see paranormal groups be able to go in here and do investigations and things like that and just kind of poke around,
All right, that would have been a good one back in the day for like ghost hunters because they used to do the house visits.
Yeah.
That was kind of
Oh,
like
yeah.
their thing. But yeah, I can't. So
Well, that was a mighty good episode you put together there, babe.
well, thanks. I tried,
Yeah.
and I'm sorry, everybody. I know, and hey, if you guys actually like the style of podcasting, let us know. We're probably still going to go back to the way we do it.
Yeah, we enjoy that a lot.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun, and it's fun to listen to. But it's fun to do something like this every once in a while, too.
It is.
So
And for a good reason, because we got stopped a few times by our little kiddo coming in here.
getting sick.
Getting sick in
It
his little
was
bucket.
fun and smelled wonderful.
Oh, stop.
So I guess this is where we're going to end this one. Where can they find us?
They can find us on Instagram at forthebooze_podcast and on Facebook at forthebooze.
You can also find us on Twitter at forthebooze and to our glorious, wonderful, fantastic YouTube at forthebooze. Hey, some people are really digging it, so we're getting comments and stuff. So
Super cool.
It's pretty rad.
Yeah.
And don't forget, if you are interested in seeing some kind of like little series where we do videos where we watch shows, and I mean, we're really just going to critique them and probably be pretty silly while we do it.
Yes.
Then let us know on there. We want to know because I kind of want to do it. It sounds like fun. And and also if you have a listener story that you'd like us to read or a suggestion or like a few other people have, just saying hi, hit us up for thebooze12@gmail.com. We would love to hear from you.
Yeah, and for everybody who does and has wrote in, we really appreciate it.
We love you guys.
We do. We love you guys, and we love hearing from you. And we are so glad that our little baby is being liked.
We're having another baby.
Absolutely not.
And hey, we may have an announcement about our show coming up.
Super
We may actually have
exciting.
2 announcements about our show coming up.
I'm so excited.
Yeah, our show may be expanding as well as something else. So we'll see what the future may hold. But I guess this is where we click out of here, and I guess I got to go write another one.
Well, thank you everybody so much for listening, and we will see you in the next one.
Bye.